second edition of the Airtel and the Economic Times Global Business Summit was host to many enlightening panel discussions. One of them was on making CSR count, how companies contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. This socially relevant discussion outlined how various private, government and social organizations are taking initiatives to help align investment with impact to create meaningful and sustainable development across India.
Jaco, I'd really like to start with you in terms of the sustainability development goals, really, and how do you see them in the context of CSR in India? So, we can be a little bit more specific around that agenda, and that'll be the opening cue for some of the other people.
I think the Sustainable Development Goals is sometimes confusing, even for us in the UN that helped develop it, because it is a lot and there's lots of indicators. So I think for my rationale, just bringing it down, really it's to deal with 4 P's for me. The first is really about people, and specifically poor people, how to get more people out of poverty and how to address also the social needs that people have, whatever it is. The second is really about prosperity, how to generate income and what type of growth will be generated and how will it be generated. Will people who are still excluded from that, will they be still excluded as the growth and prosperity kind of increases in society? And then I think the third P is really around the planet. We have one planet. If we don't take care of the planet, business can't profit on a dead planet. That's a common saying that we say that we have, and it's also for generations to come that we need to do that. And I think the fourth one really is the key one, is in terms of partnership. So what it means is that people have to come together across partnerships, whether it is business, whether it is the government, whether it is civil society, whether it is some of the multilateral organizations like the UN or any others. And I think creating that partnership for complex development solutions is really the key. And that's really where a lot of the challenges comes in.
Mr. Kanoria, really, as the owner of a large business in multifarious activities, how would you look at CSR, again from a sustainability perspective?
CSR has been included by the government recently. But before that, as a culture itself, and that is how the things have come from generation to generation. I still remember that earlier in life when we got into business, we said that whatever profit gets generated, 10% should be earmarked for social work, 10% should go towards the expenses of family, etc., and 80% should be plowed back into the business because that is sustainable. So it's a culture. So CSR is a part of culture which is being coming through generations, from generation to generation in our country. Now that the government has put a plan of the CSR, I think it just gets dovetailed with whatever the culture was. And every organization wants to find out what has to be done. Like in our organization, we believe in 2 parts of CSR. One part is the sustainability from the business perspective itself. So we create businesses which is almost like a CSR because it creates employment, it creates entrepreneurship, and that is sustainable. So therefore, instead of just giving the person fish, you teach them how to fish. Another part is that how do you help the poor, the needy, so for education, something which is sustainable, and some which is needed on an immediate basis, like the health, food, shelter.
If I can, move to you, Loveleen, in that sense, the TechM group, specifically in the Mahindra group on a wider basis, has done a lot of work around skilling, around technical skills. You're also talking about training teachers. Now, we know there are lakhs and lakhs of schools in India, and which the government runs and government sponsors. And if we have to enhance the quality of education and outputs and outcomes there, one of the most important ingredient in that system is the teacher. So would you just talk about some of the work that you're doing there?
As far as the teacher skilling is concerned, I would really like to say that it's been a very, very conscious decision after a long journey. Traditionally, almost everybody was in education, and similarly so were the Mahindras. What we did find was when you enter into education, there are really 2 kinds of things that you can do. One is support small NGO efforts, islands of excellence that exist all over the country. A really wonderful work is being done by a number of very good people that are working in the field. But we really felt was this, that the bulk of the poor and needy or the underprivileged are actually going into the government system. And what is the problem with the government system is, as far as education is concerned, is that they are good with the hardware. They can give the land, they can make the building, they can appoint the teachers, they can give the midday meal. But what is being transacted in the classrooms remained a big challenge. So we felt that investing in teacher education was very important. And one last line before I hand it over to you. In teacher education, I just wanted to add, we are only in the government space. We have PPPs with a number of different municipal corporations across cities. And we support teacher upgradation program in municipal schools of different metros.
Thanks, lovely. Namita, I want to talk about a very important part of the whole CSR ecosphere, and particularly at the ground operating level, the not-for-profits or the NGOs. Your organization has been spending time and effort in building capacity with them. What's been your experience?
India has large developmental challenges, and with almost about 21% below the poverty line. Towards this, we really need to look at the wider economic, social, and environmental parameters as far as the delivery is concerned. And from a corporate point of view, I think, solutions need to be very unique, scalable, and sustainable. Having said that, at the end of the day, these need to be replicated by NGOs on ground, because corporates only have that much ability and connect. I mean, if the corporates really had to go to the ground level also, the acceptability may not be as high as NGOs that are there. There are NGOs which are very passionately working at the ground level. However, they lag in areas of controls, compliance, governance, risk management, and performance management. So the analysis that we have done with the NGOs that we've been working with, or kind of an needs assessment, this is really the need. And we believe that there is a large scope in bringing them up the curve if worked on these 5 parameters. Because if you are getting those large funds, how do you actually have the controls in place to ensure that your working capital is not mixed up with your corpus and so on and so forth? How do you actually report, which is a very, very important parameter for us today, even in the wake of the 2% compliance. So we try to look at if there is we run a large water project where we provide safe, clean drinking water. So we look at health parameters, we look at work. Has that particular family been able to be at work? Has that particular family has been able to go to school? So, on all those parameters, we try to work out what is the value, because at the end of the day, it's all about impact.
Deepak, moving on to you. Your organization does a lot of work on CSR in semi-urban and rural areas. And I guess the employment there is more difficult. So, you worked on livelihoods, education, health, and I know it's a continuum really. But let's talk about, what is the way you're teaching people actually to fish and, get the livelihoods piece going.
If you really want to change the life of a person, I don't think a 3-month, 6-month, 1-year program is really adequate, because the world is really changing very fast and it is becoming automated. So most of the skills actually become redundant. So unless a person has that entire education background who has gone through, not like us maybe for 20-22 years, but a reasonable amount of education if a person has gone through, then the adaptability and changeability is much better. That's point number 1. The second point which I would like to make over here is that there is a significant urban-rural divide. You see a lot of industrialization in the urban areas and around the urban centers. But when you go to the hinterland, places like Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, there is only mining activity. There is hardly any industrial activity. When we get into the rural areas, in fact, our footprint is more than 95% is rural. It is hardly any urban presence across the country. So we tend to look at those fundamental issues and take a much longer view, look at a composite picture of what kind of entrepreneurship you can develop in that area, what kind of skill training would be required, and how this is complemented by your health and education initiatives, because that is what is the key for a long-term sustainable solution in that area.
Gayatri, doing a lot of work from the government side for many, many years. Government obviously has to lead in all of these spaces, the SDGs and the MDGs before that. I'd like you to explore with us a little bit about the public-private partnerships.
Before we go on to the PPP bit, What I'd like to do is to talk a little bit about the Ministry of Rural Development and our skilling program. To me, the reason I keep coming back to Ministry of Rural Development again and again is that it looks at development in a space which is key to our national development, in some ways even global development. So there's a huge canvas in which we can work in, and which we do work in, and therefore can offer a lot for people who want to partner, and depending upon their own interests and their own belief systems and their own passions that they want to use to invest in the development of the country apart from developing themselves. So there's a lot of in skill development that we are doing. The whole skill development premises on PPP. What we do is in government act as a catalyzer by saying that we'll come and invest, we'll put in the money up front because perhaps the market is not a really well-developed market. It's not a paying market and perhaps not going to be sustainable for some time to come. But we will then be the first mover and invest in this market. And please come and bring in your skills, your experience, your management, your training, your ability to link the labor market with the human resources. Instead of investing in replicating what the government is doing, can you invest in the ecosystem development, right? So it is in the ecosystem development that we can make a small go a long way and make it impactful. And that is what I'd like to leave with you as a closing thought. Thank you.
I'd like to thank all our panelists this morning. Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Welcome to the Global Business Summit, Mr. Kapoor.
Good to be
Firstly,
here.
congratulations on the 25% increase profit increase that Yes Bank has shown in the last quarter. What have your key growth drivers been?
Like they say, when the going gets tough, the tough get going, Most of all, the biggest driver has been making sure that there is preservation of asset quality.
Right.
And number two, being nimble and being agile in terms of, navigating the bank into new sectors, looking at sunrise opportunities, and at the same time, de-risking the core sectors. So I think we have been reasonably agile in these very challenging circumstances now almost like 2-3 years.
Yes.
So I think we can maintain this performance. Last quarter was very reassuring for our leadership and naturally for our shareholders.
So going forward, how do you see the whole retail banking space shaping up in the Indian context?
In the context of our bank specifically, with a name like Yes Bank, with the demographic connect Yes Bank has, with the brand connect that is resonating on social media, and the way Yes is creating its own phenomena, like India Bole Yes. To me, that is a connection with India's future. And India's future, as you correctly point out, lies in retail banking and dovetail with micro and small medium enterprises. So a bank like ours, our destiny, our courage, our boldness lies in the future in being able to really create penetration in these sectors, and that is where we are focusing, but in a steady manner.
Right. And as far as financial inclusion is concerned, the PM has been talking a lot about the Jan Dhan Yojana, and we have added over 200 million accounts since the policy was announced. At Yes Bank, how much of a focus is there with respect to these financial inclusion policies, and what's your biggest challenge?
I tell you very honestly that we are, because of our size and our infrastructure limitations, we not made enough of a dent as far as inclusion is concerned. But some of our strategies, some of our policies, some of our outreach is creating a paradigm. I'll give you a couple of examples. We have this LEAP program, which is a livelihood earnings program for women self-help groups, which is making a big shift, because what it does is that every rupee that we lend to them creates a multiplier of 3 rupees. Actually slightly more, but I'm rounding it off. Number two, what it does is in terms of payments, because payments is a very significant aspect of mobilizing savings in households, in unbanked and underbanked, through many interventions. And interventions are plenty. You can look at the Unified Payments Interface program, which has been launched by NPCI, the Bharat Bill payment program also, which makes a lot of sense, and that's also gathering momentum. are very frugal technologies to be able to create interface with feature phones.
Right.
So everybody is talking about smartphones.
Yeah.
And smartphones naturally have an advantage because they go to urban centers first before they cascade to rural and micro rural communities. But we are building technology and outreach on feature phones. Because 75% of the 1 billion phones in our country are still traditional feature phones.
Right.
So we have created payments around that, very low cost, and that is what is creating a multiplier. So far the volume is just about 8,000 crores. But the fact of the matter is that it is gathering momentum, and to me that means tremendous ability to create an outreach through non-smartphones, the feature
Right.
phones. And this is where we are focusing, apart from naturally also focusing on smartphone payments.
And as far as partnerships with telcos is concerned, what are the sort of partnerships that you're currently building, and what big ticket announcements can we expect in
You
the
see,
future?
the game is a bank naturally has to work on alliances, relationships, and technology. We call it art. Yes, art. So, we naturally want to work with all the telcos, because if you go with one, then you get restricted with the rest.
Sure.
And the universe is large enough and the market is, significant enough. So we are partnering with the telcos for sure. We're also creating e-commerce tie-ups because, e-commerce today is also a very good way of creating an outreach with small sellers and being able to render credit to them on literally online through proper KYC and all that. And so therefore technology and low-cost technologies are playing a very, very big role. So, we love to work with telcos, but we also like to work with payment platforms and e-commerce platforms, which are really garnering tremendous, potential and tremendous momentum now.
What sort of an impact have payments banks had on your business ever since they
It's
came?
very early stages for the payments bank, but the payments bank is all about inclusion, right? Because I think it's a fantastic program by the government, the new government and Reserve Bank of India, including the small banks, but they will take time to really be able to build the momentum. What it does is it brings savings and it brings lending, micro lending capacity into the mainstream banking system. So the mainstream banking system means the larger the equation for everybody concerned,
Yes.
more the spin-off for the entire banking system. So it's not competitive, it is accretive in my judgment.
Right. And CSR has been close to Yes Bank's heart. There's a lot of stuff that you guys are doing on the corporate social responsibility front. Going forward, what are the causes that you're going to constantly be supporting?
I tell you, our number one program, and we had a fantastic third anniversary only yesterday. Over 5 lakh youngsters all across our country made social cause films, 1 minute to 5 minutes, right? And these films are about local causes, green causes, environmental causes, community causes. So we did this whole thing and bundled them, and through a jury of 20, 30 top people in the country, we were able to shortlist and give recognition to about 20, 25, which is not enough. The fact is that if we can create social consciousness amongst our youth, to me, this program that we called Yes, I Am the Change, YIAC, in itself can be a metamorphosis in our country. And this has become amazingly the largest social transformation program in the world.
Right.
In all of 3 years. And we think it's still very early stages.
Right. And one of the commendable things that Yes Bank is doing is to come out with a sustainability report, which not many others are doing in the industry. What was the thought and idea behind it?
I'll tell you, before it became like a statutory requirement through the New Companies Act, my team led by Namita Vikas and Prerna Langa were proactively working on this. So what we said was, let us report the social causes, environmental causes, people, planet, earth, those sorts of issues where a bank, because a bank is a transformational agent in the system. We are a basket of the economy. We deal with all facets of the Indian community, with all strata of public and people and businesses. So a bank can play a huge role as an evangelist in the system, as a community leader, as a community change agent. So my leadership, Namita particularly, has created an outstanding reporting mechanism, which is the report card of what we do in the last 12 months. And I'm very happy to share with you, it has been given like top marks by United Nations Development Program,
Wonderful.
by CSR leadership in the world, including the London Stock Exchange. So I'm very happy that our leadership team is doing some exceptional work, and that becomes a benchmark for banking and financial institutions in our country, which can play a fantastic role in mobilizing communities.
Right. There's a host of reforms that the government has been announcing on various fronts. How would you evaluate the government as far as the banking space is concerned? What more is required?
I believe the commitment of the government, is like unequivocally, reassuring in terms of financial sector reforms, in terms of banking reforms, whether it's Indra Dhanush, and sometimes they say that we need the Brahmastra as well. But I think what we really need to understand is that the public sector banking system, which is 70%, really needs rapid fire, rapid transformation. And most of all, we believe it's only a capital issue, but to me, it is also how to construct or to reconstruct the risk architecture and the risk mechanisms so we don't have future setbacks in this particular sector. To me, the capital and the risk architecture go together. Number two, the second biggest reform in my judgment which is required is to how we can create Indian banks, Indian branches who can go into international markets and be in compliance with Indian regulation and be able to support the growth of Indian enterprises overseas. To me, that is also a very important pending item. The third thing, which is very critical, is that we have to create more and more financial instruments, more and more products for infrastructure financing. Because the mother of all the important aspects of our economy is how are we going to finance the biggest opportunity, not only in our country, in the world, is our infrastructure. And I think infrastructure bonds, green bonds, municipal bonds, I like to believe affordable housing bonds. I also like to believe that there can be proper smart city municipal bonds.
Right.
So I think we need to create more product, we need to create more distribution, and we need to architect the product around the infrastructure requirements of the country, because the government is coming out with very good policies.
Right.
Policies have to be dovetailed with financial instruments because they are the ones who have to finance.
Sure.
Equity is only one key element. So I think that's the need of the hour today.
All right. And Budget 2016 is just around the corner. What are your expectations and what are your recommendations to the Finance Minister?
I just met the Finance Minister again today, and I was just saying, sir, that there is a remarkable opportunity to create a paradigm through this budget, because 1.5 years of good learning and absorption has been there. The fact of the matter is we have to stimulate infrastructure. The fact of the matter is we have to catalyze the savings propensity in our country from levels of around 30-odd% to ideally 40-odd%. We have seen 37% in the past, because savings domestic will create the ability to create domestic and investment capital formation, the need of the hour, because we cannot predicate the entire economy on international FDI flows or FII flows.
Right.
And domestic savings in itself has to be the bedrock, the bastion of our future growth. The third thing I think we all know is the overall rationalization and naturally the overall implementation of what I hope crystallizes very soon, the GST, followed by the bankruptcy code, so on and so forth. I think taxes has created a lot of uncertainty and I think some fear and nervousness even within the domestic population.
True.
And internationally, it is like a overhang of the past. And even though the government has maintained that there's no retrospective, but there is a judicial, overhang here. So I think that must clear unequivocally, unambiguously, so that investments are going to be driven by, no tax issues, favorable FDI policies, and most of all, please remember, the government sector has to motivate investments, but the investments eventually have to come from the private sector, because 70% of the Indian capital formation is actually come from the Indian private sector. The Indian private sector's health has to be brought up to speed, whether it's through banking intervention, which is happening, whether it's through equity reforms, which means that they can de-risk, and at the same time, they have to be able to create more platforms. So investment through private corporations is a very important factor.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us on the Global Business Summit.